In the early 1st millennium BCE, the place that later became Pompeii already mattered, even as a modest settlement. It sat near the Sarno River, where fresh water met routes that led out to the wider Bay of Naples. People did not choose this ground by accident. They followed what worked. A river meant drinking water, fishing, and an easy path for moving goods. Just inland, Mount Vesuvius rose above the plain. It was not known as a threat yet. It was known for what it gave. The soils around it grew rich from old volcanic deposits, and that fertility supported steady farming. Fields could produce more, and surplus changed everything. Extra grain, oil, and wine did not stay at home. It became trade. Geography kept pushing the settlement forward. The river helped farmers reach markets, and the coastline nearby opened contact with passing ships and travelers. That created a simple logic. Food came from the land, exchange came from the water, and security came from being slightly raised above marshy ground. A small community endured because its location kept paying back the effort. As the settlement grew, it stopped behaving like a loose cluster of farms and started acting like a town. People planned space instead of just using it. Paths hardened into streets, and meeting points became fixed. Newcomers and neighbours brought different habits, and each wave left marks behind. Italic groups grounded daily life and local rules. Then Etruscan influence pushed a wider outlook, stronger organisation, clearer public areas, and a community that expected order. Greek contact added another layer, and it changed what a town was supposed to look like. Religious life moved into purpose-built temples set in places that announced shared beliefs and shared power. Building in stone, shaping sanctuaries, and defining sacred space turned worship into a public statement, not a private act. The town's layout followed that same logic. Streets and landmarks started guiding movement, directing crowds toward where decisions were made and where the gods were honoured. And the marketplace life grew more complicated with every step. Buying and selling no longer meant occasional exchange. It became a routine that needed structure. Trade demanded measures, storage, and places where strangers could meet under known rules. Goods arrived from nearby fields, from the coast, and from wider networks that linked different cultures. The market turned into the town's engine. It pulled people into schedules, created competition, and made Pompeii valuable to anyone who wanted influence. Pompeii did not fall to Rome in a single dramatic moment. It slid into a new order as Roman power spread across Italy. Treaties and alliances pulled Campanian towns into Rome's system, and Pompeii felt that pressure. Local leaders still ran daily affairs, but Rome now set the limits. The city's future depended less on nearby rivals and more on decisions made far away. Political control changed how people spoke and how they governed. Latin gained ground beside older local languages, first in official notices, then in public life. Rules, offices, and legal habits increasingly followed Roman models, because that was how you gained influence under Rome. The city's institutions started to look familiar to any Roman visitor. Pompeii stayed Pompeii, but it started to operate in Roman terms. The shift also showed in stone. Public building styles leaned toward Roman tastes and Roman purposes, spaces for administration, for public gathering, for display. Construction choices carried a message. They said the city belonged inside Rome's world, and its elites knew it. Each new inscription in Latin, each redesigned civic space, tightened the connection. Pompeii was no longer just a regional town. It was a town under Rome. By the late 2nd century BCE, Pompeii stood inside Rome's sphere, but it did not stand as an equal. Many communities in Italy fought beside Rome, paid taxes, and followed Roman orders, yet they still lacked full Roman citizenship. That imbalance hardened into anger. Then it turned into action. Across Italy, allies demanded rights, and when Rome resisted, a broad revolt began. Pompeii, like many towns, faced a choice that carried real risks. The social war reached Pompeii as a real, physical conflict, not a distant headline. Roman armies moved to crush the rebellion, and the city became a target. Siege pressure and violence disrupted trade, farming, and normal government. Local leaders who had once managed civic life now operated under emergency conditions, and loyalties split. When Rome regained control, it did not simply restore the old arrangement. It imposed a new one designed to punish resistance and prevent it from happening again. That change arrived under the dictator Sulla, who settled his veterans in conquered towns. Pompeii became a Roman colony. Land changed hands fast, often away from older families and toward new settlers backed by power. Property lines, voting blocks, and public offices shifted with them. The city's identity changed at the legal level and in daily life. New citizens with new claims, new names in charge, and a community forced to live with the consequences of losing a war. In the early imperial period, Pompeii benefited from peace and wider trade, and money started to show itself in stone and habit. The city's entertainment became organized and public. An amphitheater stood ready for mass events, drawing crowds from the surrounding countryside. That crowd mattered. It meant vendors sold more, inns filled faster, and local leaders gained status by paying for spectacles. Prosperity stopped being private. It became a schedule. Daily life also shifted toward comfort. Public baths expanded into a routine place to wash, exercise, and meet, and they required constant fuel, water, and staff. That demand kept trades busy and pay moving through many hands. Meanwhile, wealthy homes and villas invested in display, painted walls, careful gardens, fine dining spaces, because success needed proof. Frescoes did more than decorate. They announced taste, ambition, and connection to Rome's wider culture. Out on the streets, the city ran on small transactions. Shops opened directly onto the road, and counters served quick food, wine, cloth, and tools to people who did not live behind grand doors. Workshops produced, repaired, and recycled because imported goods still needed local labor to stay useful. Notices went up, prices changed, debts got counted, and deliveries arrived by cart. Pompeii prospered through everyday motion. That motion kept the city awake. In 62 CE, the ground under Pompeii suddenly failed. A powerful earthquake hit without warning, and in minutes the city's confidence broke with its walls. Buildings cracked, columns shifted, and roofs collapsed where people had trusted stone to last forever. Public monuments suffered alongside private homes, streets filled with rubble and fear, and everyday routines stopped cold. The damage did not look like one clean disaster. It looked like the city had been pulled apart. After the shock passed, Pompeii faced a hard choice: abandon the place or rebuild it. Most stayed, and reconstruction began on a scale the city had never needed before. Work crews cleared fallen masonry, shored up weak structures, and raised temporary supports to keep buildings standing. Repairs competed with daily life. Some owners restored quickly, others ran out of money and left ruins in place. Whole blocks became half-finished, caught between collapse and recovery. The rebuilding changed Pompeii as much as the quake did. Streets turned into work zones with scaffolding, repairs, and constant hauling of materials. Plans shifted mid-project, and neighborhoods no longer matched their old patterns. A damaged house might be divided and rented, a shopfront might be widened, a wall rebuilt in a cheaper way. Old prestige mattered less than practical fixes. Pompeii kept functioning, but it did so while being rebuilt, loudly, unevenly, and in plain view. After the earthquake of '62, the ground never fully settled. Small tremors returned in bursts, too weak to topple walls but strong enough to remind people what lay beneath them. Builders kept working, but repairs started to look like a race against something unseen. Cracks reopened, fresh plaster broke again. The mountain stayed quiet, yet the city lived with the idea that quiet did not mean safe. Other signs followed, and they reached into daily routines. Wells and springs shifted, some running low, others turning odd in taste or flow. Water pipes needed more fixes, and fountains did not always behave as they once had. Farmers watched their fields and channels, trying to read what the land was doing. Nothing pointed to a clear date or a clear threat. It simply suggested instability, spreading outward from Vesuvius. Still, life continued because it had to. Shops reopened beside half-finished buildings, and public spaces stayed in use even when repairs dragged on. People adjusted to the inconvenience and treated the warnings as another burden to manage. That normality became its own decision. Each new tremor, each change in water raised anxiety, but it also trained the city to endure. Pompeii carried on right up to the edge of 79. Late in August of 79 CE, the day still began like any other. Then Vesuvius broke open. A towering column rose fast, and what went up began to come down. Fine ash started to fall across Pompeii, light at first, easy to ignore. People tasted grit, felt it in their eyes, and heard the first strange impacts on roofs. The familiar tremors had become something else. This time, the mountain did not stop. The ash thickened, and then the pumice arrived, stones full of air, light enough to be carried far, heavy enough to hurt. It piled up quickly, turning streets into drifts and making every step harder. Roofs began to take weight they were never built to hold. Breathing became work. Visibility dropped, and now everyone faced the same problem at once: leave the city while movement was still possible, or stay and trust walls and ceilings. Shelter sounded safer, but it demanded time, and time became the rarest thing. Those who stayed tried to block doorways, cover mouths, and wait for the fall to end. Others chose the roads, pushing through darkness and falling debris, not knowing which direction was truly safer. Every choice carried risk. The eruption did not give clear signals, only worsening conditions. An ordinary day had turned into an emergency measured in minutes. Then the eruption changed character. The steady fall from above no longer told the full story. A series of scorching clouds raced down the slopes of Vesuvius, pushed by gravity and speed, not wind. These pyroclastic surges carried ash, gas, and fragments, and they moved faster than a person could run. What still stood in Pompeii faced a new threat. Breathing became impossible. Survival became a matter of seconds. One surge followed another. Each wave hit with heat and force, squeezing through streets and over walls, flooding any space that air could reach. People who had stayed behind, waiting for the fall of pumice to end, met something else entirely. Roofs weakened and collapsed under earlier weight. But now the deadly part came through openings, not just from above. The city's last movements ended quickly. Pompeii stopped being a place of escape. After the final surges, ash kept settling layer upon layer until Pompeii disappeared under a heavy blanket. The burials sealed doorways, filled courtyards and packed streets solid, cutting off light, sound and weather. In that silence, time did not erase things in the usual way. Buildings stayed standing where they had been. Objects stayed where they had fallen. Bodies stayed where life ended, held in place by the ash that hardened around them. In the modern era, Pompeii no longer lived as a town. It existed as a site, huge, mapped and carefully uncovered piece by piece. What had once been streets for work, worship and gossip had become evidence. The same ground that had fed farms and carried traders now carried researchers, tools and measuring tape. The eruption ended daily life. Excavation began a different kind of life. Pompeii's great value came from its accident of preservation. Ash and debris had sealed rooms, streets and objects in place, not as a perfect snapshot, but as a real one with mess, repairs and unfinished work. Modern archaeology treated the city like a problem to solve. Layers got recorded, not just removed. Traces got sampled, dated and compared. Each method turned silence into information. Millions of visitors then walked the same routes, not to buy bread or hear news, but to understand how ordinary Romans had lived. Pompeii became a shared reference point, a place where history felt direct and personal because it stayed physical. Yet it also became fragile. Weather, crowds and time wore at what ash had protected. So the site demanded constant choices: what to open, what to stabilize, and what to leave buried.